Meet Charles Bennett, a powerful CEO known for precision, control, and a garden he keeps on his high-rise balcony. But one afternoon in a quiet Boston neighborhood, everything changes. He sees a 9-year-old boy, Lucas, tending a community garden with uncanny focus, mirroring the way Charles works. Something about the boy feels familiar. Curious, Charles digs deeper, only to discover a truth buried by betrayal. Lucas is his son, hidden from him for years by his own brother. Now, Charles must confront his past, an old love, lost messages, and the guilt of not knowing. But rebuilding trust isn't easy. Lucas sees him as just another donor. Claire, the boy's mother, demands answers, and Edward, Charles's brother, fights to keep the truth buried. Will Charles earn his place in the family he never knew he had? Will a boy's gift, just a bundle of vegetables wrapped in the word family, be enough to heal what was broken? This is a story of redemption, sacrifice, and the quiet power of second chances. Subscribe now to follow this emotional journey of love, legacy, and growing something real. Charles Bennett didn't usually walk, especially not through neighborhoods like this, modest streets where hydrangeas bloomed over iron fences and kids played barefoot in narrow alleys. But something in him, that morning, had needed distance from glass towers and boardroom echoes. Boston's South End was quiet, save for the murmur of bees and the distant hum of traffic. And then he saw him. A boy, no more than 9. Kneeling in a narrow community garden tucked between 2 brownstones, the child moved with focused, almost reverent care. His small hands cupped a tomato plant's roots, lowering it into the soil like it was made of porcelain. He pressed the dirt in gently, watered it, then sat back, examining it like an artist studies a canvas. Charles froze. There was something unsettling in the boy's concentration, something familiar. The garden itself was nothing fancy. Rusted chain-link fence, raised beds built from mismatched lumber, a worn sign that read, "Grow Together," and yet every leaf, every line of the soil rose looked precisely ordered, just the way Charles arranged his desk, just the way he once arranged his life. He took a step closer, almost without thinking. The boy didn't notice. He was humming now. Not a song Charles recognized, but the melody was simple, purposeful, like it came from somewhere deeper. Then the boy stood, brushed off his jeans, and pulled a battered notebook from the edge of the garden bed. He made a few notes, glanced at a chart labeled rotation schedule, and began moving toward another plot. Charles blinked, shaken by a strange knot in his chest. He pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo, not of the boy's face, just the scene, the careful layout, the quiet focus. He tucked the phone away just as the boy turned toward a woman waving from a nearby stoop. She was older, maybe late 60s. She smiled as the boy jogged over and handed her a small bouquet of herbs. "Thank you, Lucas," she said warmly. Lucas. The name pressed into Charles like a chord struck out of key. He watched as the boy sat beside her and began talking, animated now, pointing to the garden as if explaining something. Charles stepped back into the shadow of the brick wall and exhaled. What was it about this child? It wasn't just the focus, or the name. It was the way he moved, something in his posture, the slight tilt of his head, the way he held the pen in his right hand. Charles felt his stomach twist. That was his habit. He did the same when reviewing contracts, one eyebrow raised, fingers drumming the pen against the page. He hadn't felt this kind of pull since. He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he turned and walked, briskly, back toward the car idling at the corner. His assistant, Nina, looked up from the passenger seat. "You all right, sir?" Charles slid into the back without answering. He stared out the window for a long beat before finally saying, "Do we have anything on the Dorchester Community Garden project?" Nina blinked. "I can check, but that's not one of our properties. I don't care about ownership. I want to know who runs it, who funds it, who uses it." She hesitated, then tapped quickly on her tablet. "There's a local nonprofit, run mostly by volunteers. I can request details." "Start with the boy," Charles said softly. "Lucas." She turned slowly. "Do you know him?" Charles didn't answer immediately. He watched the sidewalk pass in a blur, then said, almost to himself, "I think I should." As the car pulled away, the final image in the side mirror was the garden, and the boy returning to his notebook, writing something as the wind stirred the leaves. Charles didn't realize his hands were clenched. He'd built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, crushed rivals without blinking. But one boy, in one garden, had just shaken something loose inside him that had been buried for years. And for the first time in a long time, Charles Bennett felt unsure of who he'd been and what he might have missed. The image of Lucas kneeling in the garden still clung to Charles as he sat alone in his study that night. The city pulsed beyond the tall windows, but inside it was silent, almost unnaturally so. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, the way he moved, the notebook, the name. Lucas. He whispered it to himself, quietly, as though saying it aloud might confirm something he hadn't dared believe. Charles had never married. His life had been his company, his rise, his empire, but there had been one woman, Claire. Brilliant, grounded, radiant in a way that had nothing to do with money. They had loved deeply once, until it all fell apart with no explanation, no closure. Just silence. He tapped his fingers on the oak desk, a rhythm matching the way Lucas had tapped his pencil in the dirt. "Nina," he called out softly, and in seconds his assistant appeared at the doorway. "Yes, Mr. Bennett." "Find out who that boy lives with. Lucas, full name, guardians, school, everything." Nina hesitated. "Should I involve our legal team?" "Not yet. Discreetly. I just want information." The next morning, Charles was in a small neighborhood office of the nonprofit that ran the garden. The air smelled faintly of potting soil and lemon tea. A woman in her 60s sat across from him, wearing gardening gloves she hadn't bothered to remove. "You're not the usual type of donor," she said, watching him carefully, "and most people don't notice Lucas." "I did," Charles replied simply. She studied him for a moment. "His name is Lucas Morrow. Lives just down the street with his grandmother. His mom works 2 jobs, clerk at a grocery store and cleaning houses when she can. Good kid. Quiet, focused, smart." Charles swallowed. Morrow, Claire's mother, was Jane Morrow. He hadn't heard that name in over a decade. He leaned forward. Is she all right?" The woman narrowed her eyes. "You know her?" Charles didn't answer. The woman, Jane, tilted her head. "You should. You used to come by their apartment back when Claire was in school, before everything got messy." The world narrowed. His hands felt suddenly cold. "Claire is your daughter, isn't she?" he asked. Jane nodded slowly. "And I'm guessing by the look on your face that you think Lucas might be yours." Silence. Jane folded her hands in her lap, voice gentler now. "You were Charles, right? From Cambridge? The one who disappeared?" "I didn't disappear," he said, almost defensively. "She stopped writing. I thought she had moved on." Jane gave him a long, unreadable look. Well, life has a cruel way of testing what people believe. Charles sat back, eyes distant. "Can I talk to her?" Jane raised an eyebrow. "If you really want to help, don't start with Claire. She won't trust you, not yet." Charles looked toward the window, where kids played in the street. "Then let me start with Lucas." That afternoon, Charles stood at the edge of the garden again. Lucas was tying up vines to a trellis, unaware of the man watching him. Charles waited, then cleared his throat. Lucas turned slowly. His face was curious, not afraid. "You're the man from yesterday," he said. Charles smiled, trying not to show nerves. "I am. Your garden looks even better today." Lucas shrugged. "It's not mine. It's for everyone. But you take care of it like it is." Lucas looked down. "Plants don't like being yelled at. They need someone steady." The words hit Charles harder than they should have. "I used to garden," he said softly, "on my grandfather's land. It was the only place I felt quiet." Lucas nodded, as if understanding. "This is my quiet." A pause. "I'm Charles," he added. "Lucas?" the boy said, but didn't offer his hand. Charles bent slightly. "I wanted to ask, do you need any help here? Supplies, maybe some tools?" Lucas frowned. "People only offer that when they want a tax write-off." Charles blinked. The boy's words were sharp, deliberate. "I don't need a rich man feeling sorry for me. I'm not feeling sorry for you," Charles said carefully. "I just thought maybe I could help." Lucas looked up, squinting. "You don't look like someone who knows how to help." The words settled between them, like seeds not yet ready to grow. Before Charles could reply, Lucas turned and walked toward the compost pile. Charles watched, heart heavy, not with offense, but regret. He reached into his coat pocket, where he'd placed an old photograph from college. It was faded, but Claire's smile still shone through. She'd once asked him, "If you had to choose between power and peace, which would you pick?" He hadn't answered then. But now, watching the boy who might be his son walk away, he wondered if it was time to finally choose. The photograph of Claire hadn't left Charles's coat pocket in days. He held it often without realizing, his thumb brushing the edge as if trying to trace back the years they'd lost. It was late evening now, and Boston's brownstone rooftops stretched beneath a dusky sky. But Charles wasn't watching the city. He was pacing the floor of a modest flower shop in Cambridge, heart pounding, breath shallow. Jane had finally agreed to arrange a meeting. He wasn't prepared. The bell above the door jingled as she walked in. Claire. She looked different, older, leaner, but her presence was still the same, unshakable, clear-eyed, quietly fierce. She wore a faded denim jacket and had dirt on her palms from the garden. When she saw him, her steps halted. Charles took a breath and whispered, "Claire?" She didn't smile. "I shouldn't have come," she said, her voice even. "But Mom said you insisted." "I did," he said, stepping closer, "because I needed to see you, to tell you. I didn't know." "Claire, I thought—" She cut him off, her voice trembling now. "You thought I gave up? That I just moved on and forgot about us? About everything we dreamed of?" "No," he said softly. "I thought you gave up on me." Claire stared at him. "I wrote to you, Charles. I wrote and wrote until I had nothing left. I even showed up at your office once, and your assistant told me you'd relocated to London permanently. I thought you'd made your choice." Charles's brow furrowed. "I never went to London." She stepped back. "Don't lie." "I'm not. Claire, I swear. I never got a single message from you. Not one. I thought you didn't want me anymore." There was a long silence. Claire's jaw tightened. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a crumpled letter. It was one of hers. She unfolded it slowly. "I kept copies," she said, her voice flat. "Every message. This one I sent 2 weeks after I found out I was pregnant." She handed it to him. Charles scanned the words, and his heart sank. She'd begged him to meet. She'd written about the child, about love, about fear, and the address, his company's old Boston office. Edward had handled all correspondence then. His older brother had insisted on managing Charles's life while he focused on strategy. "Edward," Charles whispered, the realization dawning like a cold wind. Claire nodded, bitterly. "I never heard from you again after that. When Lucas was born, I decided I'd raise him without you, but I always wondered, if you knew, would you have come?" Tears burned at the corners of his eyes. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "Yes, I would have dropped everything." She shook her head. "It's too late, Charles." "No," he said, stepping forward. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I want to try. Let me try." She looked at him, guarded. "Why now?" "Because I saw Lucas," he said. "I saw him in that garden, and something in me just snapped. He looked like me. He worked like I used to. I had to know who he was, and when I found out, Claire, I've never felt regret like this." Claire's arms dropped to her sides. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. "He's not some charity case," she said. "If you want to be in his life, don't show up with gifts or donations. Show up with consistency, with patience." "I will," Charles said, voice steady. She gave him one final look, then turned toward the door. "He has piano lessons every Saturday at 10, she said without turning back. "You can start there." Then she walked out. Charles stood still, overwhelmed, holding the crumpled letter in both hands. Outside, the city bustled on, unaware that a man had just glimpsed the life he might have had. He glanced down at the final line of the letter, the one Claire had underlined in blue ink years ago. "If you ever find this, come home. Your son is waiting." He folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and tucked it into his coat. For the first time in years, Charles Bennett knew exactly where he needed to be. The flower shop door had barely closed behind Claire when Charles sank into the chair beside the window. His hands still trembled as he unfolded the letter again, the one she'd written 9 years ago, begging him to meet, to talk, to be present for the child they'd created. Her handwriting felt like a whisper from the past, and it rattled him more deeply than any boardroom confrontation ever had. He had trusted Edward, trusted him with everything. The next morning, Charles walked into his office early, long before the staff arrived. The building was quiet, too quiet for what he was about to do. He bypassed the glass conference rooms and made his way to the IT department, where Owen, a nervous junior tech, greeted him with wide eyes. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't know you'd be in this early. I need access to archived email logs from the spring of 2014, Charles said quietly. "Everything from Claire Marsh, her emails, any attachments, any messages sent to my corporate account." Owen hesitated. "Sir, I'd have to check with Edward. He handles executive privacy settings." Charles's voice dropped. "Not this time." An hour later, Owen returned with a thumb drive. His hands shook as he passed it over. "These were flagged as diverted correspondence," Owen explained. "Marked for deletion after review by your brother." Charles thanked him and took the drive upstairs, to his office. He locked the door. The screen lit up, file after file opening one by one. Emails from Claire. Dozens. Some long, some brief, some angry, some aching. All of them unread, all rerouted. His heart twisted as he read the one titled, "Please read this for our son." Claire had sent a picture of a newborn, bundled in a striped hospital blanket. Lucas. And in the message, she'd written, "His name is Lucas. I didn't choose it because it's trendy. I chose it because it means bringer of light. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would light your way back to us." Charles leaned back, stunned. His brother hadn't just hidden the truth, he'd erased it. The next call he made wasn't to Edward, it was to Claire. She answered on the third ring. "I read your emails," Charles said softly. "All of them. Every word you sent. Edward blocked them. He deleted everything. I didn't know, Claire. I didn't choose to disappear. He made that choice for me." There was silence on the line. Then Claire exhaled, slowly, like the release of a breath she'd held for years. "I figured," she said at last, her voice tired, "but some part of me stopped hoping a long time ago." "You were right to stop," Charles whispered, "but I'm hoping now. I want to make this right. I want to be his father." Claire didn't respond right away. "Then you'd better start acting like one," she said. "No more corporate speeches, no more guilt. Show up. Be present. That's what he needs." "I will." Charles spent the afternoon looking through more of the emails, photos of Lucas's first day of school, a birthday cake with smudged frosting, a crayon drawing of a man with a tie holding a child's hand. Labeled, "Me and Daddy." It was drawn with green marker, Lucas's favorite color, Claire had written. That night, Charles printed the drawing. He framed it and placed it on the nightstand beside his bed. As he stood in the darkened hallway of his penthouse, he stared out at the city lights. For years, he'd built towers and fortunes, but a single drawing, sketched by a boy he'd never met, had undone him. In the quiet, Charles whispered, "I'm coming for you, son." The framed drawing still sat beside Charles's bed, the green crayon slightly faded in the morning light. "Me and Daddy?" The image of a stick-figure man holding a child's hand haunted him, not because it was crude, but because it was pure, full of a hope Charles hadn't yet earned. That morning, he stood outside the community garden once more. The same breeze rustled the tall sunflowers, the same smell of fresh soil and mint hung in the air, and there was Lucas again, kneeling by the tomato beds, concentrating as if the world depended on it. Charles approached slowly, careful not to startle him. Lucas didn't look up. "You're back," he said plainly. "I am," Charles replied softly. "I was hoping we could talk." Lucas wiped his hands on his shorts and finally turned. "Are you one of those people who gives out school supplies and then disappears?" Charles hesitated. "No, I'm not here to drop off a check." "Then why are you here?" Lucas's eyes narrowed, full of suspicion no 9-year-old should carry. Charles lowered himself to Lucas's level, kneeling beside the marigolds. "I'm here because I think we're connected, and not just because I see myself in the way you take care of this garden." Lucas tilted his head, puzzled but guarded. "You think we're connected? Like cousins?" Charles almost smiled but stayed serious. "More than that. I think you might be my son." The silence that followed was so still it felt like even the leaves were listening. Lucas stood up abruptly. "Look, mister, I don't know who you are or what you want, but my mom already works 2 jobs, and I don't need some rich guy pretending he cares." "I'm not pretending." "Then prove it," Lucas said, crossing his arms. "Plant something." Charles blinked. "What?" Lucas pointed to a bare patch of earth near the compost bin. "That spot's hard, dry. The last guy who came here said he wanted to help. Doug once said it was too much work and left." Charles looked down at the cracked soil. It was clay-heavy, dry, full of roots. Lucas handed him a trowel. "If you're serious, put something in the ground and come back to check on it." It wasn't a handshake, but it was something. So Charles dug. In loafers and designer slacks, he dug. He planted lavender, soft, purple, calming, fragrant. Claire's favorite, the same she used to grow on her apartment balcony back when they were in college. Lucas didn't say anything more, but he watched. That evening, Charles sat in his car for a long time, soil still under his fingernails. He stared at the empty passenger seat where a boy should have been, and for the first time in years he didn't care about the next board meeting or quarterly report. He only cared if that lavender grew. 2 days later, he returned. The lavender had survived the heat. Lucas stood nearby, watering basil. "You came back," the boy said without looking up. "I said I would," Charles answered, Lucas paused, then nodded toward a small wooden box beside the hose. I saved you some of the basil. Thought you might want to try making pesto or something. Charles picked it up gently. Inside was a bundle of bright green tied with a piece of twine, and nestled beside it, one single marigold. It means trust, Lucas said quietly. Miss Jane said marigolds are for trust. Charles held it like it was fragile. I don't deserve your trust yet, Lucas, but I'm going to earn it. Lucas met his eyes, and this time didn't look away. The marigold had wilted slightly, but Charles still kept it in the passenger seat of his car, wrapped gently in tissue. Trust, Lucas had said. It felt fragile, earned in inches, not miles. Now, Charles stood outside the back entrance of the community center's kitchen, where the staff let volunteers in for early prep. He hadn't come to inspect the garden this time. He was here for Claire. She stepped into view just as he raised his hand to knock, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, wearing an apron dusted in flour. Her eyes met his, and they both froze. "Claire," he said quietly. "Charles," she answered without warmth. They hadn't spoken since college, and even though he'd stood in boardrooms across continents, he suddenly felt like a boy again, uncertain, ashamed, but still in love. "I should have come sooner," he said, "but I didn't know. About Lucas, about what Edward did." Claire crossed her arms, jaw tightening. "Didn't know? I wrote to you. Twice. When I was pregnant and after Lucas was born." His heart sank. "I never got those letters." She let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't. Your brother intercepted them, didn't he?" Charles nodded slowly. "I found one. In an old server archive. Edward erased the others." Claire turned away, wiping her hands on her apron. "You disappeared, Charles, and when I needed you most, I thought you chose silence." "I never would have," he said, stepping closer. "You mattered to me." "Still do." Claire exhaled, the fight softening just a little in her shoulders. "Then why are you here now? To ease your guilt?" "No," he said. "I'm here for Lucas, because he deserves to know the truth, and because I want to be his father, if you'll let me try." She looked at him carefully, as if trying to measure the sincerity in his voice. "He thinks you're just another rich man passing through, a donor with a conscience." "I understand that," Charles admitted, "and maybe that's fair. But I've seen how he moves in that garden. The way he focuses, like the rest of the world disappears. That's me. That's us." Claire swallowed. "He's never had a father, only me, and my mom when she can help. He's careful with his heart." "I won't take him away from you," Charles said. "I just want to be part of his world." Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to a side counter and opened a drawer. She pulled out something wrapped in a cloth napkin. She handed it to him. "This was meant for you, years ago." Charles unfolded the cloth slowly. Inside was a small, hand-knit cap, blue and fraying around the edges. A tag was stitched on the inside, in Claire's handwriting. "For Daddy, from your son." His chest tightened. "Claire! Why didn't you tell me more?" "I tried," she said, voice catching. "But after a while I stopped hoping. Life got heavy. I needed to focus on keeping Lucas fed and safe." He nodded, holding the cap to his chest. "I want to earn back every day I missed. I know I can't rewrite the past, but I can fight for a better future." Claire looked at him for a long moment, then gestured toward the garden outside. "He trusts plants more than people. They don't leave." "I won't," Charles said. "That's not a promise I'll break." Just then, Lucas appeared at the door, a paper bag of compost in hand. He paused, surprised to see them both. "Mom?" he asked. Claire glanced at Charles, then back at Lucas. "He came to talk." Lucas looked wary, but he didn't turn away. "Are you still coming back to water your lavender?" Charles knelt slightly, matching Lucas's eye level. "I will. Every week, if you'll have me." Lucas studied him for a beat, then gave a small nod. Okay, but it needs mulch next time. Charles smiled gently. Deal. Claire watched them, arms crossed but eyes softer than before. As Charles stood to leave, he touched the cap again, still folded in the cloth. This means more than you know. Claire didn't reply, but she didn't close the door either. And as Charles stepped into the fading Boston sunlight, the cap held close to his heart, he wondered, could love, like lavender, grow again in tired soil? The knit cap still sat on Charles's nightstand, a quiet reminder of all he'd missed. After his heartfelt conversation with Claire, he'd begun to believe there was a path forward. But hope, he was learning, often invited resistance. That resistance arrived early the next morning, in the form of a polished envelope hand-delivered by a courier from a high-profile law firm in Back Bay. Charles stood on his front porch, envelope in hand, the Boston air crisp and unforgiving. The name on the letterhead made his stomach turn. Edward Bennett, represented by Hawthorne and Dale, LLP. Inside, the legal jargon was dressed up in polished cruelty. Edward had filed for emergency guardianship of Lucas, citing concerns over Charles's fitness as a father, including emotional instability and abandonment of parental responsibility. Charles's hands clenched. He walked back inside, the quiet of his penthouse suddenly suffocating. He picked up the phone. "Claire, it's me. I need to talk to you. Now." They met at a small corner cafe near the community garden, just past noon. Claire arrived with tired eyes and a quiet strength that Charles was learning to admire all over again. He slid the letter across the table. "He's trying to take him. My own brother." Claire scanned it, her face tightening. "He wants custody? He's using everything he can, twisting the past into a weapon." Claire set the paper down, breathing slowly. Why would he do this now? Charles hesitated. Because he's losing control. He manipulated everything for years, kept us apart, buried your messages, and now that I'm trying to make it right, he sees it as a threat. Claire nodded slowly, then looked out the window toward the distant patch of green where Lucas tended the garden. Lucas doesn't know. No, Charles said softly, and he shouldn't. Not yet. Claire folded her arms. So, what are you going to do? Charles didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small photo Lucas had drawn last week. 3 stick figures in front of a garden. One labeled Mom, one Me, and the last one, Charles. "I'm going to fight," he said. "Not just in court. I'm going to fight for the right to be in his life, for real. Not as a donor or a weekend visitor, as a father." Claire studied him, voice low. "This isn't just about Edward. It's about legacy, about whether you really mean what you said." "I do," he said firmly. "I walked away from a $100 million partnership to be here. I'm not walking away from him." A silence passed between them, heavy but not hostile. Then Claire spoke softly. "He asked about you yesterday." Charles looked up, startled. "He said your hands looked like his, and when I said nothing he shrugged and said, maybe he's like a neighbor, just good at watering things." Charles laughed gently, but there was a crack in it. "That's more generous than I deserve." Claire gave a faint smile. "Maybe, but he's watching. He may not say much, but he sees everything." Charles exhaled. "Then I have to show him something worth believing in." Later that night, back at his office, Charles opened the drawer where he'd once kept contract proposals and quarterly forecasts. Instead, he pulled out a box of old photos, him and Edward as boys, their father beaming between them, a family once built on unity. He found the one photo Claire had sent years ago, never delivered. Lucas, barely a year old, clutching a marigold. He whispered to himself, "He's mine, and I won't let Edward erase him too." The next morning, Charles stood before a team of attorneys outlining his plan. "We're filing a countersuit," he said calmly, "and I want full disclosure of all digital communications from the family archive. If Edward deleted messages from Claire, we'll find them." His lead attorney, a sharp woman named Dana Lynn, leaned forward. "This will get ugly, Charles. Are you prepared for what it might expose?" Charles looked at the marigold drawing taped beside his desk. "I'm not afraid of ugly anymore," he said. "I'm afraid of losing the boy who draws sunflowers on napkins and thinks I water things because I care." Outside, a single marigold bloomed in the building's rooftop garden. And as Charles stepped into the elevator, ready to face the legal storm ahead, one thought grounded him. No matter what it costs, Lucas was worth it. The letter from Edward's attorneys still sat on Charles's desk, its sharp edges curling slightly under the weight of the decision Charles had already made. The previous evening had been restless. He'd stared at the ceiling of his Beacon Hill penthouse, unable to sleep, hearing Lucas's voice echo in his mind, gentle, curious, laced with hope and suspicion. "Do you water things because you care?" That question haunted him more than any courtroom accusation, because deep down, Charles knew this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a question of worth, of legacy, of who he would be, not as a CEO, but as a father. Now, as the early morning sun broke through the Boston skyline, Charles stood in the boardroom of Bennett Holdings. His executive team was already seated, notes prepared for a high-stakes investment deal that had taken 2 years to build. He didn't sit. "I won't be leading today's presentation," Charles said softly, his voice clear but heavy. "In fact, I won't be finalizing this deal at all." There was stunned silence. His CFO, Martin, blinked. "Charles, if we walk now, we lose. The equity position, $2 billion, maybe more." Charles nodded. "I know. Then why?" He looked out of the glass wall, down toward the neighborhoods where Lucas tended his garden. "Because there's something more important than equity." A younger executive asked quietly, "Is this about the boy?" Charles turned. "It is." He didn't owe them an explanation, but he gave one anyway. "There's a custody hearing in 2 weeks. My brother's trying to strip me of the right to know my son. He's using my absence, my business, everything he can twist." He paused. "So, I'm giving him nothing to twist." Martin leaned forward cautiously. "You're choosing personal over professional?" "I'm choosing family," Charles said. "For once in my life, I'm putting that first." The boardroom stayed quiet. No applause, no outrage, just the sound of a man reclaiming something he'd lost, himself. That afternoon, Charles met Claire outside the school where Lucas attended aftercare. She looked surprised to see him in jeans and a windbreaker, not his usual blazer. "You didn't go to the meeting?" she asked. "I canceled the meeting," he replied. Claire tilted her head, uncertain. "Why?" Charles smiled faintly. "Because I can rebuild a company. I can't rebuild a childhood if I miss it again." She searched his face, wary but moved. "You gave it all up?" "I gave up a deal," he clarified. "Not everything, but yes, I gave up something big, to prove something bigger." Claire looked down at the sidewalk, then back up at him. "He's waiting for you in the garden." Charles stepped into the community garden just as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over rows of kale and mint. Lucas was crouched near the fence, watering snap peas. He looked up. "You're back." Charles crouched beside him. "I am." Lucas kept watering. "Did you finish your meeting?" Charles shook his head. "Nope, I skipped it." Lucas blinked. "Why?" Charles hesitated, then said softly, "Because I wanted to be here, with you." Lucas didn't reply right away. Then he handed Charles the hose. "These ones need more water." Charles smiled and took it, gently watering the base of the stalks. "You know, I used to grow tomatoes with my dad, every summer. He taught me that the strongest plants grow from the deepest roots. Lucas glanced at him. Was he nice? Charles looked up at the sky. He tried. Sometimes he didn't know how, but I think he loved me, even when he didn't say it. A quiet pause passed between them, filled only by the sound of dripping water. Then Lucas asked, "Are you going to leave again?" Charles stopped watering. He met the boy's eyes. "No, Lucas, I'm not." Lucas nodded, a long, thoughtful nod that carried more weight than any legal victory. That night, Charles sat alone in his apartment. The marigold drawing Lucas had given him now framed beside his desk. The phone rang. It was Dana, his lawyer. "We filed the countersuit. We'll need you in court next Thursday." "Understood," Charles said. Dana paused. "You should know. Edward's team tried to subpoena your financial records to claim you're liquidating out of instability." Charles laughed softly. Let them. Let them see what a man looks like when he stops hiding behind money." Dana exhaled. "You sure about this path, Charles?" He looked at the drawing again. "Absolutely." The court date loomed. The stakes were higher than any merger Charles Bennett had ever negotiated. But tonight, standing at the edge of the community garden under soft lantern light, he wasn't a CEO preparing for battle. He was a man waiting for a sign, from a boy who didn't yet know how deeply he'd changed him. Claire had called earlier, her voice careful, but not cold. "Lucas has something for you," she'd said, then paused. "He asked if you could meet him at the garden after supper." So Charles had come. No chauffeur, no tailored suit. Just a flannel shirt, jeans, and the kind of quiet anticipation that made his heart beat faster than any boardroom pitch. The garden was empty, save for a gentle rustle near the rosemary. Then, from behind a row of tomato stakes, Lucas emerged, small arms wrapped around something bundled in cloth. Charles stepped closer. "Hey, buddy." Lucas didn't speak right away. He walked up slowly and extended the bundle with both hands. Charles crouched and accepted it, gently unwrapping the soft dish towel to find a bunch of freshly picked vegetables, carrots, a tomato still warm from the sun, a few sprigs of basil, and nestled in the middle, a note. The handwriting was shaky, letters large and uneven, but deliberate. "Family. I want to grow this with you." For a long moment, Charles couldn't speak. He blinked rapidly, his throat tight. Lucas shifted awkwardly. "They're not perfect. Some of them are crooked." Charles shook his head, voice low. "They're the most beautiful things I've ever held." He looked at the boy, his son, and for the first time Lucas didn't look away. "I wasn't sure if you really wanted me," Lucas said softly, "or if it was just something rich people do." Charles took a breath, choosing every word with care. "I've done a lot of things in my life because they looked good, impressive, strategic. But you? I'm not doing this for image, Lucas. I'm doing it because I missed 9 years I'll never get back. Because every time I see you, I see the best thing I never knew I had." Lucas studied him, eyes wide. "You gave up a big job thing for me?" "I did," Charles said quietly. "Why?" Charles hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the marigold drawing, the one Lucas had given him weeks earlier, now folded and worn from being carried every day. He held it up. "Because you gave me this, before you ever gave me trust. You told me, without knowing it, that you still believed in family, and I want to be worthy of that." Lucas's voice was barely a whisper. "You already are." They stood there in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Around them, the garden swayed with wind and memory, a father and a son, no longer strangers. Then Lucas leaned in and hugged Charles. Not a stiff, polite hug, but one that clung tight, like a seed finally deciding the soil was safe enough to grow in. Charles closed his eyes, holding his son with both arms. When they pulled apart, Lucas wiped his nose on his sleeve and grinned shyly. "Mom said you might cry." Charles laughed, brushing a tear from his cheek. "She's always been good at seeing through me." Lucas tilted his head. "Will you come tomorrow? We're planting radishes." "I'll bring gloves," Charles promised. Later that evening, Charles sat in his den, the bundle of vegetables placed gently on the mantel. The note now rested inside a new frame, next to his late father's watch. Two symbols of legacy that couldn't be more different, yet somehow belonged side by side. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Thank you for not giving up on him, or me." Charles replied, "Never again. One day at a time." He set the phone down, heart full in a way no business victory had ever filled it. Tomorrow, the court would begin reviewing the case. There would be cross-examinations, evidence, and Edward's manipulations to battle. But tonight was about radishes, and a note, and a little boy who no longer looked at him with doubt. As Charles turned off the light, he glanced back at the framed note once more, letting its words settle like roots in his chest. "Family. I want to grow this with you." The morning after Lucas's quiet gift still lingered in Charles's chest like the warmth of sunlight on stone. The note, "Family. I want to grow this with you," now sat in a frame beside his bedside lamp, a reminder that not all legacies are built with cement and steel. Some grow with soil, patience, and forgiveness. The courtroom was silent. The judge's eyes scanned the documents from the orphanage. A letter from Sarah before her passing, formally requesting Charles be notified as Lucas's father. A counselor from the center spoke kindly of Lucas's transformation since meeting Charles. The mood was shifting. The truth had begun to eclipse Edward's carefully constructed lies. That afternoon, after the session adjourned, Claire asked to meet at the greenhouse behind the old school near Dorchester. It was where she brought Lucas to learn about plant life before the community garden expanded. The air smelled of basil and damp cedar mulch. Claire stood near the back, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. Charles walked in slowly, hands deep in his coat pockets. "You always did love this place." Claire nodded without looking at him. "It was quiet here. Lucas loved chasing butterflies between the benches. He still does." He stopped beside her, careful not to step too close. "Thank you for not keeping that letter from the judge." Claire turned then, her eyes steady. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." A beat passed. Claire sighed. "You've done more than I expected, Charles. You showed up, over and over. You listened. You gave up things I never thought you would." Charles's voice was low, sincere. "He's worth more than every deal I've ever made." She looked at him, pain flickering through her features. "And yet you still walked away 10 years ago when I needed you." "That's what I came to say." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "This was the only message of yours that reached me, before Edward stepped in." Claire took it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope and read her own words from a decade ago. "I'm scared. I'm pregnant. But I still love you." Her throat caught. She blinked hard. Charles continued gently. "I never responded because I never got it. I thought you left me, that you chose to disappear without a goodbye." Claire shook her head slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I wrote every month after Lucas was born. Photos, updates. I begged you to write back." Charles's jaw tightened. "Edward intercepted them. He told me you moved on, that you didn't want anything from me. I only learned the truth a few weeks ago when I found your messages buried in the company server, hidden, deleted, but not gone." Claire's fingers pressed the letter to her chest, breathing deeply. "He wanted control, over the company, over you, over all of us." Charles nodded. "And now he wants custody. Not because he loves Lucas, but because he sees him as leverage." Claire turned, her voice firm now. "Lucas isn't a pawn. He's a child. A kind, hopeful, brilliant child. He doesn't need to be protected from you anymore. He needs to know you'll stay. I will, Charles said without hesitation. She studied him, searching for doubt. Even if I'm not ready to forgive everything? His reply was soft, unwavering. I'll take whatever piece of trust you're willing to offer, and I'll earn the rest, day by day. Claire looked down, then back at the envelope in her hands. He asked me this morning if he could call you Dad. I told him it was his choice. Charles's breath caught. What did he say? Claire's lips curled into the faintest smile. He said he'd wait until the radishes sprout. He said, that's how he'd know you're really staying. Charles chuckled quietly, emotion swelling behind his eyes. Then I'll be here when the first green pokes through. Claire stepped closer, just a few inches. We've both been broken by the people closest to us. That kind of betrayal. It builds walls. I'm not here to knock them down, Charles said gently. I'm here to plant something new. She nodded, the smallest movement, but it carried weight. Outside, the greenhouse door creaked open. Lucas peeked in, holding 2 muddy gloves. You coming, Charles? Claire glanced at him, then back at Charles. He still calls you by your first name. I'll earn the other one, Charles said quietly. Lucas waved the gloves. The radishes aren't going to plant themselves. Charles walked toward him, taking the gloves. As they stepped out together, side by side, Claire remained behind, staring down at the letter, proof of a lie, and perhaps the beginning of something true. The radishes had sprouted. Charles stood by the garden bed early that morning, watching the tiny green shoots break through the soil. Beside him, Lucas beamed with pride, dirt smudging his cheeks. Claire watched from the porch, arms crossed loosely, her expression somewhere between guarded and hopeful. But as promising as the moment felt, tension still lingered, an invisible thread pulling tight from the outside. That thread snapped just after lunch. Claire's phone buzzed. She answered, listened in silence, then handed it to Charles without a word. It's the firm. You need to hear this. Charles pressed the phone to his ear. This is Bennett, and the voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. Mr. Bennett, you need to come to the boardroom, now. It's about Edward. The call ended. 30 minutes later, Charles stepped into the conference room of Bennett & Cole Enterprises, where the senior partners sat stone-faced. On the table, a USB drive, a laptop, and a folder marked Restored Communications. The head of legal, Miss Eliza Martin, slid the folder across the table. We ran an internal audit. These emails were found buried under layers of deletion. It took a whistleblower and a forensic analyst to find them. Charles opened the folder. Dozens of messages, most from Claire. Subject lines, please respond. I want you to know your son. I still believe in you. He felt the breath leave his chest. These were deleted intentionally, Eliza continued. Your brother routed them through a shadow server, all tied to his credentials. Charles's voice was low. How long have you known? We confirmed it this morning. He also falsified records to claim you ignored parental contact, hoping it would sway the custody proceedings. The room was silent as the weight of betrayal settled. Eliza's eyes met his. You need to act fast. The board's voting on interim leadership. With this, we can remove him. Charles nodded slowly. Prepare everything. Later that evening, Charles returned to Claire's house. Lucas was asleep, his fingers still dusted with soil from the day's planting. Claire met him at the door, her face tight with worry. Well? Charles pulled a printed email from his coat pocket. Claire took it, recognizing her own words. You found them, she whispered. He nodded. All of them, and I'm going to show the court, the board, everyone. Claire's shoulders dropped with relief, but her voice was wary. Will it be enough? Charles looked toward Lucas's room. It has to be. She stepped closer. "He's starting to believe in you. If this backfires, I won't let it." There was a beat of silence between them before Claire asked quietly, "Why didn't you ever doubt Edward?" Charles looked down, then answered with raw honesty. "Because I grew up trusting him more than myself. But that ends tonight." He paused, then reached into his coat again and pulled out a small wooden carving, an old bird figurine Claire had once gifted him, years ago. "I found this in one of the old boxes at the office. Thought I'd lost it." Claire took it gently, her thumb brushing the worn edge. "You kept it? Even when I thought you were gone, I couldn't throw it away." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then maybe part of you always knew." That night, Charles stood before the full board. He didn't rage. He didn't accuse. He simply placed the folder on the table, opened the email archive on the screen, and read aloud one message from Claire, dated nearly a decade ago. "I'm sorry for not being stronger, but if you want to know your son, come find us. He deserves to know the best parts of you." Silence followed. Edward stood frozen, his jaw clenched, sweat beading at his collar. Then came questions, probes, legal terms like malicious interference, parental obstruction, and fraudulent omission floated through the air. By the end of the night, Edward was suspended pending investigation. His nameplate was removed from the executive wing by morning. The next day, Charles brought Lucas back to the community garden. The boy ran ahead, inspecting the growing rose. Charles knelt beside a patch of basil and turned to Claire, who stood quietly behind him. "He called me Dad this morning," Charles said, voice trembling, "just once, then ran off like it was no big deal." Claire's eyes welled. "It is a big deal." She walked to the plot, pulled a weed from beside the parsley, then asked softly, "What happens now?" Charles didn't hesitate. "We keep growing, all of us." The first shovel of soil felt different, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. Charles stood beside Claire and Lucas as they broke ground on the new community garden, no longer just a plot of land, but a space with purpose, built on healing, second chances, and quiet redemption. Children from nearby shelters gathered behind the temporary fence, their curious faces peeking through. Volunteers lined the edge with seedlings. The city council had approved the land use a week earlier, with Charles personally funding the project in Sarah Jane's name, Lucas's late grandmother, the woman who'd held everything together when others fell short. Lucas looked up at Charles, wiping sweat from his brow. "Dad," he said, his voice still small but steady, "should the carrots go near the herbs or the lettuce?" Charles's chest tightened with emotion at that one simple word. Dad. It was still new, but it no longer carried hesitation. He knelt beside Lucas and gently placed a hand on his son's back. "Let's plant them near the herbs. They need space to grow, just like people do." Claire watched from under the canvas awning, arms crossed loosely, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't said much since the board removed Edward and cleared Charles's name, but she'd stayed, and that meant something. Later that afternoon, as golden light filtered through the trees, Charles stepped away and found Claire arranging small clay signs with the children. One read, "Hope," another, "Belonging." The one Lucas had painted simply said, "Family," with 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one medium, one small, beneath a bright orange sun. Charles picked it up carefully. "He sees us as whole," he whispered. Claire turned to him, brushing soil from her fingers. "He believes again. That's because of you." He shook his head. "No, it's because of all of us. You kept him steady. Jane raised him when no one else did, and now he's teaching me how to show up." Claire glanced away, her voice quiet. "I used to write to you every month, hoping you'd show up." "I know," Charles said, pulling a folded, weathered letter from his back pocket. The first one. the one Claire had sent the week after Lucas was born. I read every single one now, and I'll never stop showing up again. Her eyes shimmered. I want to believe that. You don't have to believe it yet, he said softly. Just walk beside me. We'll grow something better. They stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of a children's laughter and garden chatter filling the air. A wind swept through the garden, lifting the scent of basil and fresh earth. That night, under string lights and fading stars, the first harvest was shared with the kids. Lucas handed out bundles of greens, grinning as he told each child how to grow their own. Charles watched him speak with a confidence that reminded him so much of Claire, and so much of who he might have been, had someone nurtured him at that age. As dusk turned to night, Lucas handed Charles a second note, another one of his carefully written gifts. This one read, "You came back. That's all I ever wanted." Charles read it twice, then pulled Lucas into a hug that said everything words couldn't. Nearby, Claire watched them quietly, and this time she didn't step away. Instead, she walked toward them, knelt beside them, and reached for Charles's hand. "We may not be perfect," she said, "but we're planting roots now." Charles looked at her, then at Lucas, then at the garden bathed in soft light. "We are," he whispered, "and this time they'll last." As Lucas pulled them both toward the raised beds for one final tour, the old keepsake bird, once hidden in Charles's drawer, now sat on the sign that read, "Welcome to the Bennett Garden." It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. A legacy reborn from pain, regret, and rediscovered love. And it was only just beginning.